Hello everybody and welcome back to Southern Deadly Yarns. My name's Eve from Onkaparinga Libraries and this is Elijah from Neporendi Aboriginal Forum. And we are very excited today to be joined by Thomas Mann, who is a Torres Strait Islander man living in Darwin, as he's just said, and is a big advocate for the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which he has now written two gorgeous books about. So hey Thomas, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Eve. It's a pleasure to be here, coming to you from Larrakia country.
Thank you. And it's good to be, on Kaurna country. Although, as Eve said, it's a little bit cold, but we would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, their ongoing spiritual connection to country, their elders past, present and future, and they're maintaining advocacy of being a strong voice to maintain and look after country. So, it's important that we acknowledge that. We also ask that, if people online want to give us a bit of a shout out as to whose country you're on and where you're from, that'd be great too. And feel free to, pose a few questions. If people in the audience want to answer that too, that'll be great. Essentially, we'd really like to have, that safe place where people can bounce ideas off one another and different questions and have that sort of safe space online. So, thank you for those that are joining us tonight.
So Thomas, can you set the scene for us and give anybody who's watching who might be unaware, just coming to learn about the Uluru Statement now, can you give us a bit of a background on the Uluru Statement from the Heart and how it came to be?
Yeah, I can do that. I'll do this briefly, though the Uluru Statement has a long history because it is built from the history of First Nation struggle. And of course, our struggle began, with the coming of the arrival of Captain Cook and the false declaration of terra nullius. And it's always important to note that just before he arrived, or even for a while after he arrived, our people, the First Nations of this continent and adjacent islands, had a peaceful way of life, and knew how to live with the land in a way that, we were able to live with abundance. And when I say peaceful, I say that with not only from my own knowledge as a Torres Strait Islander connected to my culture, but also how experts describe it as a peaceful culture, because we know that from the development of so many different First Nations languages, and I say different as in, very different from each other, unique First Nations languages, hundreds of them, that we weren't a conquering people, that we did have a peaceful way of life. We were the masters of dispute resolution in many ways, and we were an advanced society. It's always the place that you've got to begin. Colonisation, of course, brought all sorts of destruction, and the Uluru Statement is a part of that struggle for our people to be treated fairly, to be heard, and it's a culmination of many statements and petitions over the years. We could talk about the Yirrkala Bark petitions, or even a petition in the 30s to the Queen, Fred Maynard, the leader of the first Aboriginal organisation. The 1930s, also the petition done by William Cooper, the Yirrkala Bark petitions in 1963. The Larrakia petition to the Queen in 1972, the Barunga Statement in 1988, the Eve Valley Statement in the early 90s. The Uluru Statement is a culmination of all of that struggle, each of those petitions and statements, and the lessons learnt from all the things that we've tried and have failed to move the decision makers. So that's the longer background behind the Uluru Statement, and more contemporarily, 13 regional dialogues. Elijah acknowledged was one of the guys involved in that, and those 13 dialogues had 3 days of debate and passionate discussion. Elected delegates such as Elijah and myself, and more than 250 others, we came together in the heart of the country and we made the Uluru Statement. Based on that history and based on what we know we can achieve. Just lastly on what the Uluru Statement is, One of the lessons from those previous petitions and statements is that every time we've had a petition or statement before, these aspirational moments, they've been ignored by the powers that be, and this one is written to the Australian people, and therefore it's up to the Australian people to respond, not those in Parliament. Yeah, I didn't go too long there, Eve and Elijah.
No, but it's a very important point that, you know, it is to the people of Australia. It's not to the whims of whatever government of the day may be around, but it's actually to the people of this country. And I think that's vital. And I think that's, you know, another reason why it needs to go to them.
Yeah, and a referendum, that's right.
Mm. So, Thomas, can you recite the statement for us?
Yeah, I can do that. And then I'll talk a bit about what it calls for, you know, and how it can be put to the Australian people. And I've got to say, you know, I mean, Elijah, I don't know if you certainly remember, because it was just such an incredible moment, wasn't it? That, you know, when the Uluru Statement was read for the first time by Professor Megan Davis, an Aboriginal woman, Cobble Cobble First Nation, and a public law expert. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in the room, right? And just the expectation, the tension. It was a really powerful moment, and I hope you'll feel this when I recite the statement. We gathered at the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, coming from all points of the southern sky, make this statement from the heart. Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and it coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise? That a peoples possess the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional change to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our own destiny, our children will flourish, they will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is a culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. So that's the Uluru Statement.
I feel the need to clap.
Thank you. So it calls for a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament and a Makarrata Commission to supervise truth-telling and agreement-making. The voice is the priority because the voice is so important to truth-telling. Without political power, the truth cannot be used to get the outcomes that our people need. And so, it's a really, I think, a simple strategic thing that you would establish a representative body that is strong and irremovable before you're going to get any decent outcomes in negotiating with an entity as powerful as, the government of Australia. How it would be powerful enough to do that is the constitutional part. I mentioned the AAPA, I think, earlier when I was running through the history of our struggle. That was the first all-Aboriginal political organisation, the Australian Aboriginal Progressive Association. It, like many others that came after it, all the way through to ATSIC, were destroyed by hostile government. So the Constitution is vital to protecting this representative body, this voice to Parliament, from hostile governments and their ability to silence us. The Constitution can only be changed and a voice can only be enshrined in it through a referendum. And so that's the mechanism for the Australian people to answer the invitation in the Uluru Statement. With that, with a successful referendum, that empowers the voice greatly because it's a mandate of the Australian people that Indigenous people should be heard on matters that affect them. So that's it in a nutshell, what it calls for. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just reflecting a moment as well. With ATSIC, of course, it was quite a body that sort of mirrored what a great democracy should be like. It was a highly, it functioned well because a lot of people voted, and you'd vote for your regional councils and they'd have oversight. And sometimes we forget the importance that ATSIC had and the influence that it had on Aboriginal people, and that model is yet to be superseded. And again, that was, in the stroke of the pen, that act is taken away. So
yeah, it's a really good point, Elijah. What I think ultimately what you're talking about there is accountability of our leaders to our own people, right? And that's what we don't have right now. Because any representative body with that sort of grassroots structure, really, and leaders that are able to be held accountable, has been silenced. It's important to note when we talk about ATSIC, some might remember it had a lot of problems before it was destroyed. But just to point out that that was by design in some ways, not the problems. But how those problems were amplified and not dealt with appropriately by government. They used those problems to soften the Australian public and then destroy it. And so that's an important thing to note about what happened to ATSIC. And we've got to do better. Vanstone was the minister at the time. And Amanda Vanstone admits that it was wrong to have repealed the legislation that established ATSIC. Because in the absence of that sort of strong voice with accountable leaders that represent their people unapologetically, because that's who they're accountable to, we saw the Northern Territory intervention. We saw hundreds of millions of dollars cut from services to Indigenous communities. We saw all of these terrible things happen, taking us back, decades really, as far as Indigenous advancement goes. So, it's an important thing for all Australians to establish such a strong voice.
So we're here in Onkaparinga Library this evening, Thomas. You can't see it, but the beautiful library is behind us. And you were here in person in February 2020, which I think was our last major event before COVID really hit. We had 140 people here. They were all passionately asking for voice, treaty and truth. But that was 18 months ago. So where does the statement stand now? And did COVID kind of have an effect on that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, actually. I mean, I loved coming to the library there, Onkaparinga Library. It was such a great event, and it was really good to catch up with you, Elijah, and spend some time with you, mate. But since then, things have just continued to grow. I think the 140 people that turned up there must have gone back and taken some action. And as we said to them, even a small, what feels like it is a small action, adds up. These things, as I say, from little things, big things grow. The song, Paul Kelly's song about the Gurinzi walk-off. And so we've seen from 2017, when Elijah and I were at Uluru, straight away after Uluru, Elijah, almost immediately, we did some polling to show how many people would support a referendum to enshrine a voice. And the numbers were sitting at around 50% back then. A lot of people hadn't heard of the Uluru Statement. There was a lot of misinformation out there, including what Barnaby Joyce was saying about a third chamber of parliament, which he has since apologised about. He admits he got that wrong. But over the 4 years to the last time we did polling earlier this year, that number has grown by 20%. And there's a strong correlation between the numbers of people that say they will vote yes in a referendum to enshrine a voice and the numbers of people that say they've heard of the Uluru Statement. So those numbers have grown together by 20%. And so that tells us that if that 140 people, that was at Aldinga Library, went out there and told people about it, just people learning about the Uluru Statement moves, the numbers of people that would say they'd vote yes, and therefore the confidence that we can have that we're going to win. And that's a really important thing to move politicians, that they think they can win, what they put up to the Australian people. So, yeah, really important stuff that you guys get out there and spread the word about the Uluru Statement.
Yeah, and particularly too because there is a few sort of marginal seats that are just sort of hanging in there. So yeah, it doesn't take much to apply a bit of political pressure sometimes, and if it's applied in the right area, then it might have a great outcome.
Yeah, spot on, Elijah. Don't hesitate to write to politicians, and I'm probably jumping the gun here about what people can do, guys. Sorry, but it's really important that to understand that to get to a referendum, we do need to convince the politicians. In our political system, there has to be a referendum bill passed in Parliament before the question goes to the people. So, don't hesitate to write to politicians. Even better, organise a delegation of a few of you. Book a meeting with your local federal member and go and knock on their door and say, hey, this is what we want you to do, and it matters at the ballot box.
Some great insight. That's probably the number one question we get in a lot of these Southern Deadly Yarns is people commenting that they want to help. What can I do? What can I do? I want to help. I have time. I have resources, but where do I put them? So yeah, that's some great advice. Thanks, Thomas.
Yeah, that correlation is really important. So I hope that helps you understand that what can you do if there's anyone in your circle of influence, whether it's your family, your sporting club, your book club, your local library, whatever. It's important that you spread the word of the Uluru Statement because it moves people.
Yeah, and I love to tell people that after you were here at Aldinga last year, ever since in the Aldinga Township here, there's a pizza place called The Shack, and they've had the Uluru Statement in their window, and it makes me so happy every time I go. Probably more often than I should, but yeah, it's great. It's such a simple way to spread the word.
And we have seen a lot of businesses, a lot of people come on board and publicly endorse it, of course. Which is
from across the political spectrum, you've got big corporations, you've got militant unions, you've got in the middle you've got councils and libraries and small businesses, and that tells us that we can win this in some ways, because you can't, I come from the union movement and quite a militant union, the maritime union. I was a wharfie for many years, but we can't rest in our little political bubble, right? Our ideological bubble. We've got to capture the great swathe of the middle, and that's how we can achieve this.
Yeah, and even just to reflect, we have had a few councils openly acknowledge and endorse this statement from the heart. For other councils that might be a bit hesitant, is there any sort of message that you'd have for them?
Well, firstly, if there's any council or if you can influence a council at all, that hasn't endorsed it yet, please get working on that. It's extremely important because, I think it's a great way to spread the word and to help us win this. If you know a councillor, get in their ear, try and think about the politics, map the joint, understand what councillors would be favourable, try and get them to put a motion up, assist them to put pressure on councillors, aldermen or whatever they call them that haven't, and run a bit of a campaign to move your local council to endorse it. For those that do already endorse it, the next bit of work that I'd love for you to do, if you want to do something, is then convince them about what actions they can take, more than endorsing it. I've seen some great stuff from councils. I've seen, I think it's Randwick Council in Sydney, on bus stops around the place. They've got big Uluru statement logos, and we support the Uluru statement signs. And you just can't miss it when you're getting around the city. You can't miss these signs. So anything like that is a really great thing to get a council to put resources and time into. Forums, similar to this, mailbox, mail outs the council, just informing people. There's many different things that councils can do and have the budget to do, I think, and have an obligation to do as well, with their great opportunity to spread the word.
Yeah, to create a fair and just society. Yeah.
For sure.
Yep.
So I'm going to be a librarian here and bring it back to the books. Your first book is this beautiful Finding the Heart of the Nation, published by Hardy Grant, who we're always big fans of their book. They really seem to publish some of the best ones. And it features 20 stories and perspectives of people who were signatories of the statement or who support it, are advocates for it. Was there one in particular story that stood out to you, or a few?
I think the final story in the book, I purposely kept that interview for last and put it last in the book, just because of the guy is Sammy Wilson, and his real name is Jama Uluru, so he is Uluru, and I think the book explains a bit about how he is Uluru. But briefly, for the listeners here, he is the grandson of Paddy Uluru, and Paddy Uluru is the traditional owner, who I can't remember what it was exactly, the 60s perhaps, travelled back to Uluru and started the work to reclaim the place for his people. Sammy Uluru, took me to Uluru and showed me some sacred sites and told me why the Uluru name is gifted to the Uluru statement. And he basically explains that it's because his family want the power of Uluru, that place, to empower the campaign, really. And the reason why, practically, is that his people at Mutijulu in the community there that wore the brunt of the Northern Territory intervention, they don't want to be standing alone without a strong representative body to support them if something like the intervention never happens again. To remind people what happened at the intervention, just one example of the absolute disgrace that it was that the Australian government basically turned the Australian army against its own people in the most vulnerable communities in the country. And, it's something that, is a real shame on us, and we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and The Voice is one of those ways. But there's so many great interviews in there, I loved all of them. Teela Reid, who some people have met, is in there, very great advocate for the Uluru Statement, young lawyer. Elverina Johnson from Yarrabah, a place that, has a great history in First Nations activism and, is doing a lot of work, again, that little community, tiny little community near Cairns. Each of those interviews are special in their own way. The thing I'll just say also, Eve, is that I was worried after doing 20 interviews that what came out of those interviews would be too similar to each other, because the publisher said, Hardy Grant said, be happy if you can do 9 interviews, Thomas, because, it's difficult. You've never done it before. It's hard because, people fall through or whatever, when you're trying to line them up, and it's a lot to write. And then I went out there and did 20, and it was like, I was worried that they were going to be too similar. But throughout this book, everybody has a unique story about colonialism, about survival, about, joy and hope. There's just so much different experiences across this great land that it's, really something that when it comes together in support of the Uluru Statement, I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous book. There's Sammy Wilson, who you're talking about. You should be so proud. Seriously. How did that come about? Did Hardy Grant approach you to write it? Did you have the idea for a while, or?
I was travelling around with the Uluru Statement, the original canvas, because I felt in the political inertia at the time that I was trying to find what I could do to support the campaign in the best possible way. And so when I first saw the canvas at Gama, and I talk about this in the book, I asked, Arnie Pat Anderson and Marcia Langton if they thought it would be a good idea for me to take it around. And the union, I was in a unique position because there was no money for the campaign, zero. And so Arnie Pat Anderson went and met with my union, and my union said, we'll second Thomas to the movement. And so pretty much, filled in my position as the official in the Northern Territory, and off I went with the union support. They paid for my travel and accommodation. And it was on the road after about 12 months that I realised I had a great story to tell myself, but that there were these wonderful voices of people that I'd met along the way that I thought I could help. I thought if people heard them, if people heard these voices, then they would support the Uluru Statement. I rang up Marcia Langton and I said, I've got this idea, because she just did the book Welcome to Country. And she said, yeah, great idea. I'll hook you up with the publisher that did my book. And then I met with them and away I went.
I swear, we should write a Southern Deadly Yarns book. You wanted to hook us up with Hardy Grant. I'm just joking. Anyways, and then, of course, the children's book followed, the children's version a little while later. What inspired that to kind of tell the story again, but for a different audience?
Yeah, so one of the things I experienced, firstly as a father, I experienced how my young children loved learning about Larrakia culture, the seasons, language. And whenever they learned something new, they'd come home and they'd excitedly tell us, my wife and I, about what they'd learned. And so there was that, and combined with when I was on the road with the Uluru Statement, I had it up in public in Brisbane once, and it was early in the campaign, really. It was in 2018, and this, about 9-year-old boy was walking past with his entire family, and he pulls them up and he drags them over to the Uluru Statement, and he says, that's the Uluru Statement from the heart. And so what I learned from these experiences is that kids teach the adults in their life, about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, because without the prejudice that we've been taught, growing up, with their innocence, they see the world as it should be, and they see this, they see our culture as something to be proud of, and they think that, of course, First Nations voices, should be included in the centre of everything, and that's what they teach us then. So that's why I wrote the children's book.
Definitely a good way. Definitely a good way. I've heard a number of people trying to reach people and it just doesn't work. But then if you reach their kids, then, it magically tends to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been fantastic, Elijah. It really, hits me in the heart, when I when I see teachers and libraries even, you know, like doing things with the book, Finding Our Heart. And, you know, it's just a really special feeling. And as a campaigner as well, you know, it's like, oh, how good is this? You know, like the word's getting out there and people are doing the work.
Wow. And we do have a sneaky suspicion that there might be more on the way.
Yeah, yep. I've got 2 more books coming out. I've got the bug now. I really enjoy writing. It's something that, yeah, has really helped ground myself as well, you know, and learn so much about myself and my past. And I say that because one of the books that I've got coming out is called Dear Son. That comes out on the 1st of September. And Dear Son is about fatherhood from a First Nations perspective. It is fathers and sons writing to their fathers and sons in letters, you know, through letters, and it's in the epistolary form. And so there's 12 guys that joined me. The book starts with a letter to my own son that I wrote, about 4,000 words. You know, and then 12 other contributors wrote letters to their sons or fathers. And then I conclude the book with a letter to my own father, a very short letter to my own father. And we write about life and, you know, love and, you know, struggle. We try and teach our sons about, from, you know, based on our own mistakes, about toxic masculinity, misogyny, you know, coercive control and what that is, and really try to teach our sons to be better men. But it is also about celebrating who we are as Indigenous men, something I think that is overdue. In many ways, it's a response to the Northern Territory intervention and the way that Indigenous men were demonised, you know, based on a fabrication that was in the 730 report, was the catalyst for that, you know, a deep overreaction. There was the cartoon in The Australian in 2015, I think it was, or 16, Bill Leak, the cartoon with the, you know, an Indigenous man, obviously Aboriginal man, facing a police officer who was holding an Aboriginal boy by the scruff of the neck, and basically, you know, paints the Indigenous man as indifferent to his own son, not even knowing his name. So the book's a response to that sort of stereotype. You know, I was taught in school that that my forefathers were savages and not intelligent enough to have any science or anything like that. You know, whereas non-Indigenous, you know, kids in my class were taught that their forefathers were explorers and scientists and inventors and all these wonderful things. This book is an overdue response to that, and it defiantly celebrates Indigenous fatherhood, I think, and who we are. The other one is coming out in late August, so they're coming out about the same time. It is a children's book again for older children than Finding Our Heart, or it could be for that age as well. But it is a book that I co-author with Rosie Smiler. Rosie Smiler is a granddaughter of Vincent Lingiari. Vincent Lingiari, for those that don't know, was the leader of the Wave Hill Walk-Off, a Gurindji man. It was when around 200 Aboriginal stock workers and domestic workers and their families walked off Wave Hill Station in protest that they were only being paid in meagre rations. It was basically slavery, and that became a strike for land rights ultimately at the end of the day. That children's book covers that history. It begins before colonisation, actually, as I did at the beginning of this talk. And it doesn't conclude with, you know, that celebrated moment where the Gurindji people succeeded in winning some land back, and the Prime Minister of the time, Gough Whitlam, you know, famous photo of him symbolically pouring some soil back into Vincent Lingiari's hand and you know, indicating that return of land. it actually goes beyond that moment, this book, to say the truth about what happened after that moment, in that while Gurindji people, along with many other Aboriginal people, had some land returned to them, in the absence of a voice, the absence of the ability to influence the laws and policies and regulations that controlled how they lived on their land, what Vincent dreamed of, which was to live on their land their way, wasn't fully realised. And it talks about the Uluru Statement then in its conclusion. I've given it away, haven't I?
It's a good story, though.
It's okay, we'll still read it.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. And maybe just to reflect on some of that oppressive nature, and yourself, you're on Larrakia country, you're in the Northern Territory. It's, the last I heard that, in juvenile detention, it was just like 100% Aboriginal kids. It was just like the system wouldn't be around if it wasn't even for Aboriginal people. And that's that, I guess, a good example of how that oppression works.
It's a very good point, Elijah. It's one of the reasons why I believe in a First Nations voice so much. The incarceration, you're correct, most of the time it's close to 100%, if not 100%, Indigenous youth that are in detention, incarcerated here. Some as young as 10. That's a law that needs to change. We need to raise the age there. But that's, like the Uluru Statement says, that's not because we're an innately criminal people. We're not born with greater criminal intent than any other human beings. There must be a structural, systemic issue here. And if you don't believe that there's a structural or systemic issue, then you've got to be racist because, as I said, we're not different from other human beings. And the only way that we change the justice system and the way that we're dealt with in the justice system and the way that families are dealt with to break these cycles is to establish the political power to get those laws and policies right.
Yeah, to include us in the writing of these things. I don't know of many acts of legislation that have been written by Aboriginal people. And quite often people talk about, it's how does that saying go? Don't do it about us without us, or something like that. It's just, if you're going to write these things that impact on Aboriginal people, then really we need a seat at the table, or otherwise we'll see this kind of thing again and again and again. And you did mention the Wave Hill and the Gurindji walk-off, and having a union background. What's some of the greatest sort of Aboriginal activism that you like to reflect on, just for when, I don't know, those times are dark and you think, well, how do we get through this? Yeah,
great question, Elijah. I love that. The Gurindji Wave Hill walk-off went for 9 years before they succeeded. So, that's a great inspiration. Just the staunchness of those workers and people that stood their ground all that time. And the cattlemen offered them a pay rise to get them back to work. All those tactics to try and break the strike, and they didn't budge. But your question, the Gurindji people walked off after quite a few other walk-offs from cattle stations. And so, I guess partly a great inspiration is the courage that they had to do that again after failing, so many times. But also the courage in the face of the massacres that had happened, not that long before these walk-offs. At Newcastle Waters nearby, there was a walk-off, and there was actually a partially successful walk-off well before the Gurindji Wave Hill walk-off, which was the Pilbara strike. I think it was 50 years ago, just recently, the Pilbara strike happened. And there's a couple others that I'll mention. There was the Palm Island strike, and there was a strike in Palm Island that was ultimately broken when the police went en masse to that small island, Palm Island, and forcibly exiled some of the men that were the leaders of that strike, and they never, was torn from their families and didn't see them for many, many years after that. And the other one is the Quandamuka strike on Stradbroke Island. At an asylum, there were Indigenous workers, and they went on strike and achieved, equal wages. Actually, they reckon they succeeded. That was in the 1940s. So some great inspirational struggle. And then as a unionist, I'm most proud in that each of these actions had union supporting them. My own union supported the Pilbara strike by refusing to take to sail on ships with wool, to take wool away from the Pilbara, move that cargo. The Nunkambar dispute is another one, in the Kimberleys. Anyway, I'm going on a bit, but there's so much to be proud of. The Gurindji strike, wharfies chipped in and regularly took supplies down to the Gurindji strikers. Yeah.
It's so good to hear you tell those stories, Thomas, and it's so good to see how much success you've had with your books. Something that we talk about a bit on the yarns and just in general is who has the right to tell Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's stories. And as a non-Indigenous person who wants to help, I think about it a lot, kind of walking that line between using your privilege for good, but I don't want to drown out the voices that matter, So what do you think about that? Who is it? Do you use your white privilege to kind of get to the other white people who are more likely, unfortunately, to sometimes trust a non-Indigenous voice? Or do you, take a step back and give up the stage? What do you think about that kind of dilemma?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer. I think the line is a bit blurred, as in what is best. I think, well, firstly and foremost, I think the best people to tell Indigenous stories are Indigenous people ourselves. Absolutely certain of that. First Nations voices should be telling our own stories. The reason why I say it's not so clear cut is that I think some great work has been done to advance, our ability to tell stories and our rights. I think there's some great books out there. Mark McKenna's book, which tells the story actually somewhat of what I mentioned earlier, Sammy Wilson's grandfather's story. I think that's an important book and an important story that a non-Indigenous person has brought to light. So, but there needs to be more support and resources put into promoting and educating and empowering Indigenous writers, because we are the best to tell our own stories.
Definitely.
Yeah. Even those access to resources, good libraries, historical records, sometimes they're not always open to people unless they're, studying a post-honorary doctorate or something, and it's hard to just get in these places to have a look at these texts. But I was reflecting today about the power of story as well, and I was at Woodcroft College, and hello to anybody from Woodcroft College if you're tuning in, and really that power of story and how it, elicits those sort of emotions, and it's just sort of words on a page, but you can take people on this up and down roller coaster ride of adventure, funny, heartbreaking, those kinds of things. Are there many books that you tend to really like to get into and enjoy reading most of the time?
Yeah, I love stories that move me, I think I read generally, looking for something that makes me, makes me cry, and makes me feel, I think that's the most enjoyable thing about reading, I think. But then there's what sinks in, I find that compared to watching a documentary or something, when I read, it seems to stay in my mind much better. And then that's why I love writing too, I've learnt as an advocate and a person that does quite a bit of public speaking now, it's a really great way to take what I've learnt from reading and what I've learnt from life and what I've felt. And then when you put it down on paper, when you write, you really, I don't know, put things in order in your mind, and then are able to understand, understand yourself and the world better, and I love it. Yeah, I love reading and writing.
Well, I think that might be a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us, Thomas.
Thanks, Eve. Thanks, Elijah.
Thanks for having us.
Really love talking to you.
Thank you.
See you, everybody. Thank you. Yo.
Bye.
Yeah.
Now, before everybody heads off, I'll just do a quick little plug. There'll be a feedback email coming out for us from us tomorrow. So please just take a couple of minutes to fill it in. We really rely on feedback like that to keep these programs going. We need to know what you guys are liking. Be sure to follow Onkaparinga Libraries and Neporendi on Facebook for updates. And be sure to tune into our next yarn, which is on Monday night with Nathan Lyons, who's the TikTok star of Cooking with the Koori. We've had a go at a couple of the recipes ourselves. Probably not quite as good as Nathan, but not bad, I don't think. So the link for that one's in the chat. And be sure to book a ticket.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.